Sinn Féin launched its Alternative Budget 2019 yesterday. The document talks about lifting the burden from ordinary people amid a cost of living crisis and investing in their full potential and the public services they deserve. I'm joined on the line now by Mayo Senator Rose Conway-Walsh. Rose Conway-Walsh, good evening to you.
Good evening, Aidan.
And welcome, as always, to the programme. Rose Conway-Walsh, your party argues that this alternative budget shows clearly how services can be provided as well as helping to reduce the cost of living. No difficulty there, but it doesn't talk very much about actually how this is going to be paid for.
Okay, so let's have a look at where we're at and how we reach the figures that we reached. So if we look at our net current expenditure, that's 2.41 billion, and then the capital expenditure 1.259 billion. So there's a net expenditure there of 3.5 billion, and then there's a net tax revenue of 2.4 billion. So you're left then with a balance of 1.1 billion. I don't want to confuse people with figures, but I know the question you're asking.
You've just succeeded in doing so without answering the question.
Right. So it's all right. So let's have a look at a few of the things. So we would increase the R&D tax credit to 30% for SMEs, and that would leave you 76 million. But if we look at some of the larger figures that we have...
Rose Conway-Walsh, can I stop you there for a moment, please?
Yeah.
You're talking about R&D, SMEs, 76 million.
Oh, yeah, right.
What are we talking about? What's R&D?
Okay, I apologise. So let's look at one of the other. That's research and development that's given to small and medium enterprises. But if we look at, say, the taxing of the intangible assets that are onshored by multinationals. And that's the thing, like if you look at your iPhone, you look at the material phone, say, and then you look at the intangible stuff behind it, so how it's made up and the software in it. So when we see what's given to multinationals here and how things were changed between 2015 and 2018, where large multinational companies were allowed to onshore the value of that here. Now, if we were to change that alone, and it's not just Sinn Féin saying to change it, because it's internationally accepted that it should be changed. Even the Fiscal Advisory Council, the government's own advisory council, and in Seamus Coffey, has said that this needs to be changed. If that was changed, it would give us 750 million. Straight off, it would give us 750 million. Now, if we are to look at some of the other measures... But
can I just stop you there in relation to that?
Go on.
In relation to multinationals.
Assets, right?
Yes, but, multinationals in this country employ somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 people, both directly and indirectly. In relation to multinationals, the tax regime in the United States is going to be much more attractive for them in terms of repatriating their profits. If you're going to attack multinationals in this manner, surely there's a very strong possibility that you'll drive them out of this country and therefore impacting upon a sizable number of people who are either directly or indirectly employed by these companies.
Sure, that's a legitimate argument, but we're talking about intangible assets.
I know
here.
that.
So
I know that, but you're still attacking. You're still attacking them.
There's a difference, Aidan. There is a difference. There is a difference between that and corporation tax.
I appreciate that fully.
Should be paid at the 12.5%. But in the intangible assets stuff, it's where they have onshored this. So there's no new jobs created whatsoever in relation to the intangible assets. None whatsoever. It's just a way of putting their assets onshore here. So there's no extra jobs created, no other value from it other than it's allowed to be a tax haven.
But their profits will be reduced, Rose Conway-Walsh. Isn't that the problem? Their profits will be reduced by this attack on their assets.
Well, now the profits that they need to look at, you need to look at some of these companies, like, if we look at even in terms of Apple, like they make billions of euro. Aidan, they make billions. It's not like these companies are.
But it's not a criminal offence.
Looking for a few pounds here and there. They make billions already. How much is too much? It's the greed of some of these. There are fantastic multinational companies who are very responsible, who don't spend all of their money trying to get loopholes in the tax systems in it. But why would the fiscal advice, if it was going to be banned for multinationals, why would the Fiscal Advisory Council, for instance, be advising against it and saying that it shouldn't be done? Because we don't get the benefit as it is as a state now. Why would Seamus Coffey be saying it? Why would it be criticised internationally? In all honesty, it is a no-brainer. This is a no-brainer. I'm hoping that the government themselves will cite it in their own budget next week, because it's the amount of assets that were intangible assets that were onshored between those 3 years, between 2015 and 2018. But that's just one of the measures in it. So that's 750 million. But that would get a hell of a lot of hospital beds, fully staffed hospital beds for us. But then if we look at, say, ending the corporation tax breaks for banks, we've talked about this before, Aidan, where they have it. The banks made 2.6 billion last year. They have a tax holiday on that. Now, we're not saying that they shouldn't, have any facility to be able to write off losses. But what we are saying is, if that was limited to 25% each year, then it would be a much fairer way than them getting a complete tax holiday on it. So that would need to be done as well. And if that was done, we would get in at least 76 million on that one alone.
Yes,
so,
but
there are many other things. You could increase the betting shop tax. You'd get in 104 million. You could, introduce a second home charge, which at €400, which would bring in 68 million.
Effectively, what Sinn Féin is suggesting is that the taxpayer should be taxed significantly more than is the case at present in order to finance but in order to finance what you're suggesting in areas about which we all know everything, whether it's housing, health, agriculture, education. You're suggesting that the Irish taxpayer should be paying more.
Really, you need to get this straight. And this is the absolute certainty and the fact around it. Under a Sinn Féin budget, 99% of people would pay no more tax. 99% of people. But the 1% who are millionaires and billionaires, and many of them had made money off the back of the misfortune of people who don't have their homes now and people who have suffered under austerity. Yes, we would be asking them to pay more. So, for instance, we would have a 5% income levy on income over 140,000, and that would bring in 310 million. Now, I think it's very fair to ask somebody earning over 140,000 to pay 5% extra income levy on that for the amount over the 140,000. For those earning over between 100,000 and 140,000, we would taper out the tax credits on their incomes, and that would allow us to gain 185 million. So this is all the money that can be spent on education, on hospital beds, on people with disabilities, on respite care, and all of those things that we need resources for. So it's not about, and this needs to be cleared off the table, 99% of workers would not pay any more tax under Sinn Féin. That is a fact. That is the truth, no matter what way you say it.
But looking through this document, you suggest, for example, that €7.5 million will be provided for homeowners affected by pyrite and mica.
Yes.
€1 billion will be spent, a capital spend on social and affordable housing, 154 million on education. And on and on and on and on it goes. But when you do the tallies, you're left thinking that the only way that Sinn Féin in government could achieve this is by a huge alteration of the tax system. Is
Not
that
at
what you're
all, not at
proposing?
all. You see, it has to balance. The budget has to balance. If this budget didn't balance as it is with all of those figures, it would be the blazing headlines today and in the last few days. So this all balances out in terms of the fiscal space that's available to us. And it's not a case of worsening the exchequer funding, because we know that there needs to be prudence, because we see there are many external risks that are there at the moment. So we wouldn't. But that is why it is a fairer distribution of what we have in our budget. And that's why, everything is fully costed in it. So we can stand over all of the figures on it. But people with homes with pyrite need that. The redress scheme has to be set up, because these are people who, through no fault of their own, who had no protections there from government, were sold faulty materials, who've ended up paying mortgages on houses that are falling down, that they can't live in. Now, surely they need a redress scheme for that.
But if that's the case, and I say with the greatest of respect to these people, every individual in the country who feels aggrieved because of something will be looking to the state to resolve their problems, and the state simply can't do it in terms of financing it, and technically that's not the function of the state.
Not at all. Well,
if I buy a house,
okay,
it's a private contract with a property developer, with not a property developer, local contractor, say, and there's pyrite there, then kind of tough.
Okay, I'll make just two very short points on that. It was the function of the state and the responsibility of the state when it happened in the East Coast and around Dublin to put right what was wrong with the defects in people's properties. So it shouldn't be any different for people and homeowners in the West. And secondly, these quarries, the quarries where the materials have come from, were registered by the state as well, and licensed,
but not owned by the
state.
Surely
they have a responsibility then to ensure that there has to be checks and inspections there to ensure that what comes out of the quarries when defect materials come out of it, that they stand over those as well. So, there is a burden of responsibility there. It's not just about saying to the homeowner, well, hard luck, you bought faulty materials, you live on the west coast of Ireland, so, we don't want to hear what you're saying.
Is that not a matter between the homeowner, the person who bought the house, and the person who supplied the materials, and perhaps also the person who constructed the house, that it's a private matter? It doesn't involve the state. It's a private contractual matter.
It does, in that I believe that the state have a consumer protection role.